You ever notice how water sounds different at night? It's not just the gentle lapping against the shore. It's the way the darkness seems to swallow every ripple, every splash, until you're left with nothing but your own heartbeat echoing in your ears. I used to think fishing was peaceful, a way to escape the noise of everyday life. But that was before I learned what really waits out there. Just beyond the reach of your lantern's glow, there's something about the quiet that makes you hear things you shouldn't. The snap of a fishing line when there's no wind, no fish. The low, urgent whisper that seems to drift across the water, even when you're sure you're alone. People say the worst thing you'll find on a fishing trip is a tangle of weeds or a stubborn hook. But they're wrong. Sometimes the water gives back more than you bargained for. Tonight, I'm going to share 4 true stories that changed the way I look at fishing forever. Stories that will make you think twice before you cast your line or sit alone by the water's edge. If you think you know what's out there, you're not ready for what comes next. Trust me, you'll never look at fishing the same way again. I've always loved the quiet of night fishing. There's something about the world after dark that makes everything sharper, more honest. The lake I go to isn't on any map you'd find at a bait shop. It's tucked away behind a tangle of pines, a place only the old-timers talk about, and even then, only after a few drinks. They call it Mirror Lake because on a still night, the water reflects the sky so perfectly you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. I started going there when I was 19, after my dad passed. He was the one who taught me how to fish, how to tie a lure, how to wait. I guess I kept going back because it felt like he was still there, somewhere in the hush between the crickets and the frogs. Most people won't fish at night, but I always felt safer in the dark. No crowds, no noise, just me, my rod, and the water. That night started like any other. I parked my truck at the end of the dirt road, grabbed my gear, and hiked the last half-mile to the shore. The moon was a thin sliver, barely enough to see by, but I knew the path by heart. I set up at my usual spot, a little clearing where the trees open up just enough to let you see the stars. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. I cast my line, settled onto my old folding chair, and waited. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Even the frogs seemed to be holding their breath. I remember thinking how strange it was, the way the silence pressed in on me, heavy and expectant. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just tired, that I'd been working too many late shifts. But then I heard it, a soft splash, maybe 20 feet out, like something breaking the surface. I leaned forward, squinting into the darkness, but saw nothing. Just the moon's reflection, rippling across the water a few minutes later. I noticed a light flickering on the far side of the lake. At first I thought it was another fisherman, maybe someone with a lantern, but the light didn't stay still. It danced along the shoreline, weaving between the trees, too fast and too erratic to be a person. I watched it for a while, my heart thumping in my chest, till it suddenly winked out, leaving me in darkness. That's when I started to feel it, the sense that I wasn't alone. It was like being watched from just beyond the tree line, eyes tracking my every move. I tried to focus on my line, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling only grew stronger. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. Then the line jerked hard, nearly pulling the rod from my hands. I grabbed it, adrenaline surging, and started to reel in. Whatever was on the other end was strong, stronger than any fish I'd ever hooked. The rod bent almost double, the reel screaming as the line played out. I braced my feet, fighting to keep control, but the pull was relentless, dragging me closer to the water's edge. Suddenly, the line went slack. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the mud. For a moment, everything was still. Then, from the darkness just beyond the reach of my lantern, I heard a low, guttural sound, something between a growl and a moan. It was close, too close. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. But my legs wouldn't move. The light flickered again, this time right on the water, just a few feet from shore. I saw a shape, tall, thin, impossibly pale, standing half submerged, its eyes reflecting the moonlight like a pair of cold silver coins. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just watched me, unblinking, as if daring me to come closer. I don't remember packing up. I don't remember the walk back to my truck. All I know is that I never went back to Mirror Lake after that night. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see those eyes staring back at me, waiting. And every time I hear the sound of water lapping in the dark, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run. Some nights I still feel like I'm being watched. You'd think the darkness is what makes fishing dangerous, that it's only at night when things go wrong, when shadows hide. What? You're not meant to see? But sometimes, the scariest things happen in broad daylight, when the sun is shining and the world feels safe. If you thought night fishing was unsettling, just wait until you hear what happened to a father and son on a bright, sunny afternoon by the river. Some things, it turns out, are even harder to explain when there's nowhere for them to hide. My dad and I always looked forward to our summer fishing trips. It was our tradition, just the two of us, a couple of rods and a cooler full of sandwiches, out on the river from sunrise until we were too sunburned to keep going. That year we decided to try a new spot, a stretch of river way out past the old mill, where the banks were wild and overgrown, and the water ran deep and slow. It was the kind of place you'd see in a postcard. Sunlight glinting off the water, dragonflies darting over lily pads, the air thick with the smell of wildflowers and mud. We set up on a little bend where the current slowed, and for a while it was perfect. We joked about who would catch the first fish, argued over the best bait, and let the quiet settle in around us. It was a different kind of silence than the one I'd felt at Mirror Lake. This was warm, alive, filled with the buzz of insects and the distant call of a hawk. I remember thinking how safe it all felt, how far away the world's problems seemed. It was just after lunch when things started to feel off. Dad was untangling a line, and I was skipping stones when I noticed something floating downstream. At first, I thought it was a log, but as it drifted closer, I realized it was too smooth, too pale. It spun slowly in the current, and for a second, I caught a glimpse of what looked like a hand. Fingers splayed, skin almost translucent in the sunlight. I called out to Dad, and he came over, squinting at the water. "Probably just a mannequin," he said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the edge in his voice. We watched as it bumped against a rock and rolled over, revealing a face, blank, featureless, except for a wide, gaping mouth. It didn't look like any mannequin I'd ever seen. The eyes were just empty holes, and the mouth seemed to stretch too far, as if it had been screaming. Dad grabbed a branch and tried to snag it, but the current pulled it away, spinning it downstream. We stood there, frozen, watching as it disappeared around the bend. I wanted to leave, but Dad shook his head. "We'll call someone when we get back," he said, but I could tell he was rattled. We tried to go back to fishing, but the mood had changed. Every splash made me jump, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that pale face staring back at me. Then, just as I was starting to relax, I heard a sound, a low, guttural gurgle, like someone trying to speak underwater. It came from the reeds across the river, and when I looked, I saw something moving just beneath the surface. It was fast. Too fast for any fish, and it was coming straight toward us. Dad grabbed my arm and we stumbled back from the water's edge. The thing broke the surface with a splash, sending ripples racing across the river. I caught a glimpse of long, pale limbs twisting and writhing, and that same gaping mouth opening wider and wider. It let out a sound that made my skin crawl, a wet, choking wail that echoed through the trees. We ran, dropping our rods, tripping over roots, crashing through the underbrush, I could hear it behind us, thrashing in the water, then dragging itself up onto the muddy bank. I didn't dare look back. We didn't stop until we reached the truck, slamming the doors and locking them, gasping for breath. We never told anyone what we saw. Dad said it was just a trick of the light, that our minds played a cruel joke on us. But I know what I saw, and every time I pass that stretch of river, I wonder if it's still there, waiting for someone else to come too close to the water's edge. There's something about facing the unknown with someone you trust that makes it a little easier to breathe, even when you're running for your life. My dad and I got away, but not everyone is that lucky, because not all fishing trips end with an escape. Some leave you with questions that haunt you long after the water's gone still. The next story isn't about getting away. It's about what happens when someone simply disappears, and the only thing left behind is a mystery no one can explain. I'll never forget the summer we decided to go deep sea fishing. It was supposed to be the ultimate adventure. Me, my 3 best friends, and a rented boat with just enough horsepower to make us feel invincible. We'd all grown up fishing in creeks and rivers, but the ocean was something else entirely. It was wild, endless, and full of secrets we couldn't even imagine. We set out just after dawn, the sky streaked with pink and gold, the air salty and electric. The marina was busy, but as we motored out past the last buoy, it felt like we were leaving the world behind. The water stretched out in every direction, glittering under the sun, and for a while it was perfect. We laughed, told stories, and tried to outdo each other with the size of our catches. It felt like nothing could touch us out there, but the ocean has a way of reminding you how small you really are. It started with the fog. One minute the sky was clear, and the next, a thick gray mist rolled in from nowhere, swallowing the horizon. It was so sudden, we barely had time to react. The temperature dropped, and the world shrank to a circle of pale water around our boat. The laughter died off, replaced by nervous glances and forced jokes. We tried to keep fishing, but the lines felt heavier, the silence between us growing with every minute. Then we heard it, a low rhythmic thumping, like something massive moving beneath the waves. At first, we thought it was the engine, but when we cut the motor, the sound kept going, steady and slow. The boat rocked gently, but there were no waves, no wind. Just that sound, echoing up from the deep. My friend Tyler leaned over the side, peering into the water. "Probably just a whale," he said, but his voice was shaky. I joined him, squinting into the murk, and for a split second, I thought I saw something, a shadow, impossibly large, gliding just below the surface. It was gone before I could say anything, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. We decided to head back, but the GPS wouldn't work. The compass spun uselessly, and every direction looked the same in the fog. That's when we noticed Mark was missing. One second he was there, sitting on the cooler, and the next he was just gone. No splash, no shout, nothing. We searched the boat, called his name until our voices were raw, but there was no sign of him. His rod was still propped against the railing, his jacket folded neatly on the seat. Panic set in. We circled the area, scanning the water, but the fog was so thick we could barely see the bow of the boat. The thumping sound grew louder, closer, until it felt like the whole ocean was pulsing with it. I'll never forget the look on Tyler's face, pure terror, the kind that makes you realize just how helpless you are. Eventually, the fog lifted as suddenly as it had come. The sun was back, the water calm and empty. Called the Coast Guard, filed a report, did everything we were supposed to do, but they never found Mark. No body, no trace, just an empty spot on the boat and a story none of us can explain. Sometimes late at night, I hear that thumping sound in my dreams, and I wonder what's really out there waiting beneath the waves. And I wonder if Mark ever saw it coming. With every story, the sense of dread grows, like something is building, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to show itself. Disappearances, strange shapes, things that defy explanation. I could It's enough to make you wonder if we ever really know what's lurking out there. But if you think that's unsettling, the last story will make you question what's really out there in the wild. Because sometimes, the scariest things aren't just beneath the water, but watching from the shadows, waiting for you to notice. I never used to believe in the stories people told about the marsh. Old-timers at the bait shop would swap tales about lights that moved on their own, or animals that vanished without a sound, but I always chalked it up to too much whiskey and not enough sleep. The marsh was just a place to fish, quiet, overgrown, and a little bit forgotten. That's exactly why I liked it. No crowds, no noise, just me and the water and the slow, patient rhythm of casting and reeling. It was late October, the kind of morning where the fog hangs low and thick, turning everything into a world of gray. I parked my truck at the end of the rutted dirt road, grabbed my gear, and picked my way through the reeds. The air was cold and wet, heavy with the smell of mud and rotting leaves. Every step squelched underfoot, and the only sounds were the distant croak of a bullfrog and the occasional splash of something unseen. I set up on a little patch of high ground, surrounded by cattails and twisted willow trees. The water was still, a perfect mirror for the fog above. I cast my line and settled in, letting the silence wrap around me. There was something peaceful about it. At first, a sense of being completely alone, cut off from the rest of the world. But as the minutes ticked by, that peace started to feel more like isolation. The fog pressed in closer, muffling every sound. That's when I noticed the footprints. At first I thought they were mine. But these were different, longer, wider, with a strange webbed pattern pressed deep into the mud. They led from the water's edge into the reeds, then disappeared. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just a big bird, or maybe a raccoon, but the prints were too big too, deliberate. I tried to focus on fishing, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I half expected to see someone or something standing there in the mist. The air felt colder, and the silence grew heavy, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the reeds. Then I heard it, a low, guttural croak, deeper than any frog I'd ever heard. It echoed across the marsh, vibrating in my chest. I froze, my hand tightening on the rod. The sound came again, closer this time, and I saw the reeds parting, something moving just beneath the surface. The water rippled, and a shape emerged, tall, thin, with limbs that seemed too long, bending at odd angles. Its skin was slick and pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were huge, black and unblinking. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. The thing stood there, half in the water, half out, watching me. Its mouth opened, impossibly wide, and that croaking sound poured out, thick and wet. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't listen. The thing took a step forward, its feet sinking into the mud with a sickening squelch. Suddenly, the fog shifted, and for a split second, I saw more shapes moving in the distance. Tall, thin, gliding silently through the reeds. The thing in front of me tilted its head, as if curious, then slowly slipped back into the water, vanishing without a ripple. The silence returned, heavier than before. I don't remember packing up. I don't remember the walk back to my truck. All I know is that, when I finally looked down, my boots were covered in that same strange mud, and there were new footprints beside mine, webbed deep, leading back into the marsh. I never went back. Sometimes late at night, I hear that croaking sound in my dreams, and I wake up with the taste of mud in my mouth. People still tell stories about the marsh, but I don't laugh anymore, because I know what's out there, waiting in the fog, watching for the next person foolish enough to fish alone. And I know that some things in the wild aren't meant to be found or to let you leave. So, maybe you've always thought of fishing as a peaceful escape, a way to clear your head, to get away from the noise and the crowds. Maybe you've sat by a quiet lake, or drifted down a lazy river, or cast your line into the open sea. never once thinking about what might be watching from the shadows or lurking just beneath the surface. But after hearing these stories, I wonder if you'll ever look at those places the same way again. It's easy to laugh off the strange things we see or hear when we re out in the wild. A flicker of light, a shape in the fog, a sound that doesn't quite belong. We tell ourselves it's just our imagination, or a trick of the water, or maybe a story someone else made up to scare us. But sometimes the things we can't explain are the ones that stick with us the longest, the ones that make us glance over our shoulder, or hesitate before stepping too close to the water's edge. I've shared these stories not to scare you away from fishing, but to remind you that the world is bigger, stranger, far more mysterious than we like to admit. And sometimes, the most ordinary places can hide the most extraordinary secrets. So, have you ever experienced something unexplainable while fishing? Maybe a sound you couldn't place, a shadow that moved just a little too quickly, or a feeling that you weren't alone? If you have, I want to hear about it. Share your story in the comments below, because the more we talk about these things, the more we realize we're not alone in what we've seen. And next time you find yourself by the water, casting your line into the unknown, remember, some things are better left undisturbed. You never know what might be waiting, just out of sight, for someone brave or foolish enough to notice.